navigated to make sure we can actually see your faces, which is nice. We might well just start off with our guest speaker, who's actually one of our own this month. So a person who hassles you every week by sending you an email to read a meeting or to chase up a contribution for the weekly meeting, which has been really good that Steve's done that for the last almost year for us now, I think, which is fantastic. And he's looking forward to a apprentice, I'm sure, to come on board to help him while he takes over as president next year. So just to introduce Steve. So Steve Miller was born and raised in Mansfield, Ohio. He graduated from the Ohio State University in 1979 in communications and became a private pilot while there. After a short career in radio and TV, he became an air traffic controller in 1981 and retired in 2011. He now serves as a docent at the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio, and he and his wife, Penny Proctor, are readers for voice call reading services for the visually impaired. He became a Rotarian after meeting Jim and Sue Hunt on an OSU alumni cruise in 2017. Apparently, he tells me that the 3 letters of T, H, and E in capital letters is very important. Welcome, Steve.
Okay, well, we got a little carried away there with the Ohio State University, but we were trying to delineate ourselves from Ohio University. Don't want anybody to get confused between those two. So let me see if I can do the share screen thing here. And wow, let's see if I can find everything. Here we go. Pulling up the screen and
click on the share.
Yeah, there we go. Share screen and then go to this, I hope. Anybody seeing that?
No.
Not yet.
No.
Oh dear.
Traffic controller, remember.
I hear it. Oh,
Whoops.
Down at the bottom with the green. Share
Yes, I
screen.
did try that. Let me try it again here. Share screen. Oh, there we go. That. Oh. Share.
There,
yep.
there it
We
is.
got it?
Yep.
Aha. All right then, it's loading. There we go.
Yay.
I've only tried this with Chuck and with Penny, my wife, doing it strictly as, individual on Zoom. It didn't, wasn't quite, oh well. Anyway, glad we got it. So, hey, this is all about air traffic control and why you probably will not die the next time you fly. So, what is air traffic control? Basically, it is indeed how to make 2 airplanes miss in an orderly fashion while safely moving the most airplanes possible as expeditiously as possible. And I stole the slide from my volunteer gig at the Air Force Museum. They've had these things up on video screens since COVID, and I thought, well, that's perfect. Also, 6 feet. If I only had to do 6 feet, I could have had a lot more airplanes and a lot tighter airspace, but we had to use more like 3 miles and 1,000 feet. But it would have worked. As long as they miss, everybody's happy. Nobody's happy if they don't. So, origination of air traffic in the United States started in 1929. And the guy in the middle of the screen there is Archie League. He was the first American air traffic controller, and that is his tower right there. A wheelbarrow, a beach chair, and an umbrella over at St. Louis Airport. And even though there had been airplanes more than one since 1908, it took until 1929 before anybody thought of the need to keep them from running into each other when they were in close proximity at an airport. So the next year in 1930, just about 5 miles from where Jim and Sue are today, the first radio-equipped tower was established in Cleveland. That's great, except most airplanes didn't have radios yet. So they used things like the guy in the upper right-hand corner there, a light gun. And it's just a very bright light with 3 different colored lenses, red, green, or white. And just like a traffic signal, red, bad, not don't land, don't take off. Green, cleared to go, cleared to land. And white, taxi out, taxi in. At the bottom right there is a picture of the tower here at our airport in Port Columbus, the original tower. And the guy up on the right there is pictured in that tower. Well, one of the reasons that tower was built was for the first transcontinental air service in the United States. Started in July 1929, and there's a picture there from the very first day. They had passengers board in New York, take a train overnight to Columbus, and we built the airport right next to the Pennsylvania Railroad tracks. So the people could transfer. You can see there's a train behind the terminal there. They went right through the terminal and out to the Ford Trimotor airplanes you see sitting out there in front. And then they'd fly during the daylight hours all the way to Waynoka, Oklahoma, get on the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe, head west to Clovis, New Mexico, and then get on another Ford Trimotor and go to Burbank, California. So it was taking 4 days by train to get across the continental United States. The planes cut it down to just 2 days, so cut it in half. But now you got airplanes that have to figure out a way to get from point to point. And doing that, yeah, you can look at the ground, do the thing of following railroad tracks or highways if there were any. But the very first attempts to form an airway to guide pilots was by putting lighted beacons across the country. And a picture on the left there is one of those beacons. And then at the bottom is a map of the very first lighted airways across the United States that were established in the late 20s. They were replaced by what were known as radio ranges, not your microwave oven, but a set of 4 antennas that could have a radio beam. In each quadrant of the beam, they would be broadcasting the Morse code letter A or the letter N. And you can see there, A is dot dash, N is dash dot. Where the two beams overlap, you'd have those little red lines you see down there. Those were the only 4 airways from that radio beacon. And the pilots knew if they were on the beam by listening in their headsets. And if you had a solid tone in the headset, you were flying on the beam. If you had a dash dot or dash, dot dash, you're off to one side or the other. We had what's known as very high frequency radio ranges that came into service in the 1950s, in fact, 1955. With those, you could get 360 different airways established from each beacon. And so you had many more possibilities of providing airway service across the country. Now, to keep people from running into each other on those airways, they figured out by 1935 there were enough planes flying the same airway routes that they needed some way to keep them from colliding. So the airlines came together and established what was known as an en route center. First one in Newark, New Jersey, and then Cleveland and Chicago. And they didn't actually talk to the airplanes. There were airline dispatchers who had radio stations along their routes that could get information from the pilots of where they were at any certain time and when they were supposed to be over the next point or fix on the airway. And they'd pass that by phone to these centers. And you can see the guys there using a little map table and a little what are called shrimp boats with the identification of the aircraft to do time, speed, distance calculations to figure out how to keep them safely separated, which in that case was by about 10 minutes apart on the same airway at the same altitude. And the only way they could contact the pilots was through the dispatchers or what was known as flight service stations that were built around the country by the federal government in the early 1920s when the government started flying the mail. So during World War II, radar came around. And it, of course, stands for radio detection and ranging. And we used it overseas, but the first time we used it for air traffic wasn't until 1950, 5 years after the war ended. And then they got the first long-range radar in 1955. So everything was done just by time, speed, distance calculations and reports from pilots of where they were and where they expected to be next, radioed to the ground until that was finally established. Well, we found out how limited that was because we had very poor radar coverage in June of 1956. Two airliners flying over the Grand Canyon were just flying visually, supposedly see and avoid, looking out for other airplanes, and they didn't do that. They collided right over top of the Grand Canyon, and 128 people in the two planes died. After that, there was such an uproar that finally the federal government expanded radar coverage across the United States, and what had been the Civil Aviation Administration became the Federal Aviation Agency, later changed to the Federal Aviation Administration in 1967. So they started spreading longer range radars around the country. And you can see one of the sites up there, the radar antennas in the big white ball, and sending out radar short range sites to more airports across the country. The airspace was split into 22 different areas of jurisdiction called en route centers, and they had control of the airspace from as low as the radar coverage is all the way up to 60,000 feet. But it was still very limited below 10,000 feet by even the late 1960s. They came up with a technological device to help that called the transponder, and you can see the control that's in the aircraft for one of those on the left side there. With those, the pilots could put in an assigned 4-digit code, and it was a hexadecimal code. So there's only 4,096 possible different codes across the entire world. And with that, and then with what's known as altitude reporting capability that came in the late 60s, they could send back to the radar a stronger signal and tell the people on the ground what altitude the plane was flying at. In the 1980s, with smaller and smaller computers, they finally were able to put computers on airliners at least and start using what's known as TCAS, Traffic Alert and Collision Avoidance System. With that, it started out where it would just tell the pilots, here's a suggestion, go up, go down, not even left or right, to try and avoid another aircraft that was equipped with TCAS, or when it saw another aircraft broadcasting its position and altitude. It got better and better to where TCAS now, the two computers on the planes actually coordinate their movements. Before, with the early version, you might have both computers saying climb. The other one wouldn't know that. And so you had instances where both aircraft would climb to avoid each other and then start to descend when they realized that wasn't going to work. And now they could also turn left and right. So that's much better. In the 90s, in fact, starting in '89, the global positioning system became available to civilians. And with enough accuracy down to as little as 3 meters in 2000, you could finally use it for precision navigation, which is basically being able to find your way right to a runway, where until 1989, it was very hard to do that with just the equipment on an aircraft. Now we have finally, and this just became effective on January 1st of last year, have throughout the United States what's known as automatic dependent surveillance broadcast, where aircraft, if they want to use air traffic control services, they have to have installed in the aircraft equipment that will have the GPS that tells not only what their position is, but what speed they're moving and what their motion is or their vector. And that is automatically transmitted every second to ground stations located throughout the continental United States and the world now. And we're still having it sent back to radar sites as well. Now, if you pay enough money, you can also send that up to a satellite. And so airlines are now using that across the oceans, places where there's absolutely no chance of radar coverage. That information is being sent up to satellites and then back to air traffic facilities on the ground. So we should never have another situation like the Malaysian Airlines Flight 370 that just disappeared somewhere into the ocean. Only problem is, it is, like it says, dependent. That can be defeated on the aircraft. Someone can either just flat out turn it off or pull the circuit breakers to defeat it. So you still need ground radar coverage to really know where the heck somebody is if they are not, if they're trying to hide. Some significant real days in air traffic control. The first one is what got me into the business. On August 3rd, 1981, the Professional Air Traffic Controllers Organization went on strike. They were striking for better equipment and higher wages to keep people in the profession. They had been losing a lot of controllers. Most of the people that had been trained during the 40s and 50s were now retiring, and they weren't being replaced. Well, they had all signed a statement that they would not strike. They didn't think that was going to be, they were going to be held to that. Well, President Reagan held them to that. And out of 12,300 that struck, over 11,000 were fired. So there were 11,000 job openings. I took one of those jobs. Now, the other big significant day in air traffic control was, of course, September 11th, 2001, when the Al-Qaeda terrorists used the aircraft as weapons and hit the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. What I've got up there on the screen, I'll play the animation in a moment, but down at the bottom, those are what are known as general information messages. They're printed out on what we call flight progress strips, those off-white, slightly green pieces of paper down there. And I'll tell you what the first couple say there. The first one, the GI, means general information, and then attention, the air traffic controller, supervisor in charge or controller in charge, effective 13:30 Zulu or Greenwich Mean Time until further advised, ground stop, all destinations. And they had to put in there, yes, you are reading this correctly, update at 1500. That's when they first knew that they had aircraft being hijacked. Then they came out with a clarification, stop traffic to all destinations. This includes local, visual flight rules, instrument flight rules, military flights, no one flies. And then finally, at 9:51, the first aircraft that struck the towers, they realized, stop everything. Solicit short stop destinations for all aircraft. Don't let them go to their original destination. Everybody lands now. And here's an animation up here of what happened that morning. Each one of those little things up there that are yellow is an aircraft across the United States that morning. And there is no audio with this. And there they go. Everybody's being told to land now. And there's a few aircraft that are left. Most of those were military aircraft that you're seeing there. You can see the other aircraft up in Canada, in the Caribbean, and Mexico there. but everything else is on the ground. I had worked a 4 to midnight shift the night before, and my wife called me from her office. She'd seen the first tower get hit and woke me up, and I turned on the TV just in time to see the second tower get hit. I got dressed and headed for work. By the time I got 20 miles across town to the airport, there were 48 airliners at our airport that never expected to be there that day. By the time I got there, for the first time in my career, I saw an empty radar scope. I'd never seen that before. Within 200 miles of Columbus, even at say 3:30 or 4 o'clock on a Sunday morning, there was always somebody on that radar scope. There was nobody. That was just totally unnerving. So here, how we make them miss. From the time a plane leaves its parking spot till they reach the next one, they may be protected by air traffic control. Airliners are, they're required to, all the way through, be talking to air traffic control. Private pilots like Jim's friend Captain Dan, they don't necessarily have to, unless they want to go in what's known as controlled airspace. We got a chart here in the middle with the different classes of airspace, which I won't go into. And when they actually do get to the runways, we have to keep them apart like this chart at the bottom. 2 small aircraft, 3,000 feet nose to tail. For 2 larger aircraft, twin engine or high performance, 4,500 feet. And then a full nautical mile or 6,000 feet between 2 large aircraft. And we do all this with our very own version of English. You've probably seen it in the movies. If you've ever seen the movie I'm about to play a clip from, I'm sure you know the phraseology. Here goes.
Flight 209er, you are cleared for takeoff. Roger. Huh? LA departure frequency 123.9er. Roger. All right. Request vector. Over. What? Flight 209er, clear for vector 324. We have clearance, Clarence. Roger, roger. What's our vector, Victor?
As daffy as those guys are, actually, all those words help us make things clearer. And so it really is effective. And luckily for me, as it says there in the bottom of the little comments, everybody has to do it in English across the world. Yes, we won World War II, and yes, we sort of imposed that on everybody. So there's a picture at the top from my last office. That is in the tower here at what's now John Glenn International Airport on an evening just after the rain has passed by and the beautiful sunset up there. So, as I say here, tools of the trade, Mark 1 eyeballs, and being able to ask the right questions and listen effectively were my 3 big tools of the trade. If you've got radar, and now with GPS and ADS-B, knowing really where the pilots are is a lot better. Just by the way, pilots lie. They sometimes tell you what they think you want them to, you want to hear. Happened more than once. Down at the bottom is the current radar scope for terminals or airport facilities. We were the first ones in the country to get that. When we got that in 2004, Chicago O'Hare, one of the busiest airports in the world, was still using 1972 vintage radar equipment. They kept using that until 2010, 6 years after we got ours. So here's a quick summary of my career after a post-college career in radio and TV, including being a TV weathercaster for a whole 6 weeks. I got hired after the strike in 1981. And then I was told to report in February of 82. Went to the High Altitude Center, Minneapolis, up there in the center. Just a big building with a whole lot of radar scopes in it. Went to the flight service station in Detroit for 2 years, trying to get back home to Columbus. Did my time at Pontiac Tower, west of Detroit, and that's my father's airplane, the Beechcraft Bonanza, parked in front of the little tower there. Finally got back to Columbus in 1988. The picture in the lower left is what the airport looked like in 1958 when the terminal opened. And then in 2004, we got the current tower, which I was in until my retirement in 11. FAA controllers by law have to retire the month we turn 56. And I actually went 18 months early. So in the end, you really will be just fine. The statistics are overwhelmingly in the passenger's favor. The most recent statistics I could find were for 2019. And the National Safety Council says the lifetime odds of dying as an aircraft passenger in the United States were too small to calculate. In fact, in 2019, 4 deaths were involved with airline or air carrier accidents. And all of those, except for one, was on the ground. One was a guy walked into a propeller, went the wrong way. One was a lady, when they evacuated the plane on the ground, got hit by the fire truck and run over. There was the one woman who got sucked out of the side of the Southwest jet, but you know, odds are not bad. 4 out of 926 million. So it's a pretty safe operation now. So we finally get to the last here. I've got a 6-minute video. And even though Matt Lauer turned out to be quite a jerk, I think the video was the best one that really shows what a tower controller's job is like. So I hope you guys can see and hear this.
Or here in New York, in one of the most pressure-packed offices around, its air traffic control tower. JFK is one of the busiest airports in the world, with more than 1,000 flights each day, and 90 airlines moving 150,000 passengers in and out of the city skies. And so I head to work in the control tower, 17 stories up. My first day as an intern, they gave me a security pass. Watch. Control tower up here. My boss for the day, Dave Seward, JFK's air traffic manager. Good to have you here. Seward manages a team of controllers that run a high-wire balancing act, moving planes along JFK's 50 miles of runways and taxiways. You see there's JetBlue on the runway now? Right. And another 2 JetBlues behind it. And then the landing plane always has the right of way over a departing plane. It's easier to tell a departure when he's still on the ground to stop. With a 360-degree view, controllers have eyes on planes across 5,000 acres. They rely heavily on radar, too. There are times when this tower is up in the clouds, and when you look out, all you can see is white. Is it nerve-wracking when you're here knowing there are hundreds of planes out there and you can't see one of them? You ask Will, was that nerve-wracking for you, Will? And there's a lot of weather out there. You get stressed a little bit, but you can't let it get to you. This is one cool group under pressure. A controller's job requires intense focus. They can be talking to 10 pilots at once, as many as 60 in bad weather. With this job, even one mistake needs no reset button. Because the stress is so high, they work 90 minutes, then they're going to get a fairly good chunk of time off. Is that right? That's correct. We never want to have them working more than 2 hours at one time without a break. It's also a bit of a young man's job, isn't it? I mean, I read that 56, you're done in here. So you realize I'm an intern for a job that I've already aged out on. Yes. Great. They put me to work anyway, starting with stuffing strips. A computer prints out flight details from pilots with requests to depart or land. Will Gallo works clearance. Information right below it is the type of airplane, 737 that they fly. This is the altitude that they want to climb to when they get to their cruising altitude. This is the route they're going to fly from JFK to Minneapolis. Next, it's time for training in the air traffic control tower simulator, what they call the sim. My instructor, Tom Sargent. We're going to be landing on runway 31 right, which is right out the window over here. So these are planes waiting to land on 31 right. This one and this one. It doesn't take long for me to understand the intensity of the job. Delta 6270, this is Kennedy Tower. Wind. Wind is 310 at 9. Runway. Runway 31 right. And you were clear to land. There you go, you did it. He's not down yet. But that's only half the job. Okay. So now this whole line of planes is ready. If you look at your radar, we have an arrival to that runway about 8 miles out. We have to make sure that this departure is airborne before this arrival gets. Now, in reading my homework, is that what they call shooting the gap? This is shooting the gap. 2 planes in, 1 plane out. I managed to shoot the whole new level. Singapore 425, American 1515, which is Kennedy Tower. Free to take up on 31 left and left on Victor. Winds 310 at 9. Taxi left Alpha. And it's a huge adrenaline rush. And just when I think I'm getting a feel for it, this happens. Can I get some rain and some lightning? But now you see you lost some of your visibility. I can't see any plane landing now. I don't even see the end of 31 left, where I know I've got 3 or 4 planes waiting to take off. See it over here on your ground radar. Things have gone from bad to worse here at Kennedy. It was raining, which was bad enough for me. I couldn't see a thing. Now it's snowing. And to make sure things don't get even worse, we have an arrival about 5 miles out, and we have somebody sitting on the runway that has to depart. I managed to leave the simulator without causing any major accidents. Controllers here say the view never gets old. Pretty spectacular on the ground, too. Where the rubber meets the road, that's it. Clear for takeoff, clear to land, it's all about that. And so as a fitting end to my internship, I sign off on runway 2 right. Hope you enjoyed your turning. Are you kidding? Thanks for bringing donuts and stuff and strips. My pleasure, the least I could do. It was really cool. You know, and that's one of those jobs where you only hear about those people when something goes wrong. Sure. But on a daily basis, they do that job so well, day in and day out. What's amazing though, those little strips of paper in such a high-tech world that you use to get that. That's part of it. There are others that are part on computer. There's one great radar for ground traffic. You see every plane moving on the runways on this piece of radar. United used to have on Channel 9, you could listen to all the shots from the tower. I used to listen to that just sitting on the plane getting ready to take off. And it's amazing how much these people have to keep in check, sending planes clearing to land. And in that simulator, when you clear a plane to take off or land, all of a sudden they talk back to you. And you're like, now what do I do? We practice my part.
You're like, is this meant well? Off the show.
Anyway, I want to thank them for their cooperation. Hello, today, Fantastic.
Okay, let me see if I can get out of this now. There we go. So, yeah, it was fun. Did it for 30 years. We didn't have the ground radar when the weather got bad. There were many times we could not see out the windows. And so you're just totally having to depend on what the pilots tell you and what the radar shows if you can see them in the air. So now with ADS-B, I want to give you an idea of just what's going on in the world right now. This is live. This is real time, what's out there over the United States at the moment. Give it a minute to populate here. But each one of those is an aircraft. And with ADS-B, every second, their position and altitude and everything is being updated. You can see here at Columbus, there's a number going on. We got the police helicopter 551 Charlie Papa out there, and you've got airliners going overhead. You got a few landing. You got one here that's on the ground. But if you spin out, you can see just how busy the skies really are across this country as it starts to populate there. And the great thing with ADS-B again is you can see them out there in mid-ocean, far, far away from any place where we could ever mount a radar site. And D, I don't remember what time it is down there, but you can see over Australia. Funny, everybody's on the East Coast, the South Coast, on the West Coast. Nobody's over the outback for the most part. So
No
pretty
one's
much
flying,
airplanes
Steve.
where you got people. Say what, Dave?
Hardly anyone's flying because the West Coast blocked off from the East Coast. He's got his border up. He won't let anybody else in.
Well, there you go.
So I'm surprised there's that many planes in the air, actually.
Yeah, you can't get there from there right now. So folks, that is it. I hope you enjoyed it. I will stop the screen share here. And if you got any questions, I will try and answer them. Thank you.
Where are the Southwest planes? Can you show the map where the Southwest planes are sitting?
Not many out there to show. They canceled another several
Okay.
hundred today, but
In the
there's a
parking lot?
few out there, I know.
Steve, Jerry
Yeah.
Scully. I've been reading a lot where hospitals are looking at the safety protocols that FAA has in place and trying to copy them, given the excellent safety rate of aeronautics. Can you comment on that? Do you know whether it's going on as seriously as you're writing?
Yeah, and they really have been. My wife was the deputy general counsel for a hospital system here in Columbus, and they now have over 20 hospitals. But they took the techniques that they use for some of their debriefings and how they interact with their with staff on figuring out how to brief things, and took it directly from the FAA. So yeah, a lot of what we have done, because that's the thing of, we just have to be completely honest. You have got to have a no fault culture where you're not going to, create the fear of judgment on somebody, so that they share the information honestly, and you can make changes when changes need to be made. And that's a tough thing for people to handle, but it works.
Hey, Steve,
Yeah.
did you have anything to do with the two airplanes that landed in the wrong airports in Ohio?
Oh, yes. We had that. One was well before I got there.
It was a setup here.
Thank you very much. We had a Boeing 707, big 4-engine jet that landed at the little Ohio State University Airport that's 3 miles from my house here, with an only 5,000-foot runway. They normally need 8,000 plus. The guys managed to get it stopped by the end of the runway, and they got the people off the airplane eventually. They had to drive over an air stair from Columbus to do it, but they got them off. And then they took everything out of the inside of that airplane they possibly could, put in the minimal amount of fuel, and flew it the 10 miles from OSU over to our airport, the big air carrier airport. Now, we had, much closer to my timeline while I was there, one of my fellow controllers had a Federal Express Boeing 727 trying to land at Rickenbacker Airport, about 15 south of Columbus, got a big 2 parallel runways, 12,000 feet. Guy's coming in, says he has the airport in sight. My colleague clears him for what's known as a visual approach and ships him over to the tower, which means he's just going to fly to the airport, talk to the tower. If they clear him to land, he lands. He talked to the tower controller down there, we later turned out, was laying on the floor of the tower and not looking out the window. But anyway, the 727 landed on a 4,000-foot runway at the little airport called Bolton Field, 10 miles west of there. So they managed to get that one out of there too after unloading it. The final straw was FedEx donated a 727 when they quit flying them to the school that's at that airport that has the airport mechanic school. We made sure that my buddy, who inadvertently cleared the one to land there that wasn't supposed to, worked that one that was supposed to go there in to cover a mistake. So he's even. He's got a, got it on. Well, any other questions here before I let this go back to a
People
real
need
meeting?
to take their mute button off if they have a question, because
Ah,
everybody.
yes, take the mute off, or I have no idea what you're gonna say.
So did you ever experience a close call or?
Oh, yeah, more than one. But I have to say, in my 30-year career, I never had what was known as an operational error, which is when you get two aircraft too close together. I saw fatalities. I saw, while I was at the Tower of Pontiac, an actual midair collision. I was working ground control, and I look up and I see a biplane on final approach for one of our runways, and I know there is no biplane there in the pattern. It was two single wing Cessna aircraft that came together. One came down on top of the other one. Luckily, they did it at about 100 feet above the ground. And the one that came down on top the propeller of that one switched around 4 times and stopped in the back seat before it got to the occupants who were in the front seat. They
Ugh.
came down pancake and all 3 people walked away.
Wow.
At that same airport, the year that I ended up leaving there, I had a friend of mine who was an instructor pilot. He was instructing in what was known as a Merlin aircraft, a twin engine turboprop. The pilot that he was checking out in that airplane was a former Air Force One pilot, a full colonel and thousands of hours, but he needed to get a type rating to fly that kind of aircraft, which he's now in a corporate job doing. I knew my friend was on board. They go out, they take off. I have an aircraft. I'm working ground control, which moves the aircraft on the surface, waiting to cross that runway. The airplane takes off. It gets airborne and immediately starts rolling inverted, goes over top of one of the aircraft I have sitting there waiting to cross, and smacks in on the cockpit. And everybody on board died. Turns out that they pulled one of the engines back to what they thought was going to be idle thrust, which is the toughest thing you have to do in a twin engine aircraft if that happens on takeoff. Well, the detent that should have prevented it from going into reverse broke. And so one side went into reverse while the other one was going full forward, rolled, crashed. That was also the morning after my first wife told me we were getting divorced. Not a good day for Steve. Somehow I sucked it up and came back and worked another 18 years after that. But that was probably the worst 2 that I saw during the whole thing. One last story then that you might be able to relate to. Senator John Glenn, first American to orbit the Earth, was of course from Central Ohio. And after he retired from the US Senate, he still flew his own twin engine airplane. He and his wife Ann had a home in Columbus and in Washington, D.C., and they commute back and forth in their plane. He was coming in to land one afternoon, and I knew exactly who it was on board. And he said, "Oh, we're having a problem getting the landing gear to extend. I want to fly by the tower and let me know if it's fully extended." And next to me is a trainee working, learning how to do this. And the trainee was a flight instructor. He'd flown this same kind of airplane, and he does not know this is John Glenn. This is a kid of 26. He's talking to a man who's been in space twice, flew in the Korean War, was an ace, and been a Marine pilot for decades. And he tells him, well, now, if you look to your lower right-hand side and you go over 3 notches, there's a circuit breaker. You might want to check that. And I'm telling the kid, Dean, do you know who that is? No, John Glenn. I said, be careful what you're saying. If something goes wrong, you're going to be on every news program in the world tonight. Remember, you're not flying the airplanes anymore. He is. I think you'll figure it out. He did. So there you go. Well, anything else? Or I can tell stories well past our time.
Hey, Steve, David Doherty here.
Yeah, Dave.
This is bringing back some memories when I was a young college student. I was married during college after I'd served in the Army and all of that. And my father-in-law worked for the Federal Aviation Agency. He was the guy that installed new equipment, new terminals, things like that all over the country. So one summer, Archie said, why don't you come to work at the Buffalo airport? So I said, that sounds like a good idea. So I left my then family at home and spent the summer. Well, I guess we came home from Buffalo to Pennsylvania on weekends. But at any rate, when you talked about those early terminals, I had the opportunity to be in the control tower. I think I was laying not carpet, but tiles. And watched those circular monitors that they looked into, and they were big round things, and they had little spots on them, I guess, were the airplanes that they were tracking at the time, and all of that. That was all very interesting to a young guy like that, as I was. But the time that I had the most thrill was, as I said, he put installations, did repairs, things like that. He had me out working on the runway on a ILS station, painting it. And I never was so scared in all my life, because the planes came out right to it and took up over my head, and away they went. So it's not quite the kind of story that you have, but I did have some interesting times with FAA way back. And this was the early 1960s. I'm an old buck, so it brings back some good memories.
Oh, great. Well, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, because, well, I'll tell you, the technology has really advanced. That's the thing now. The radar displays no longer have the circular sweep that they did for the beginning of my career. It's all just
Right.
like a video modeler now. It just does its little thing. And when I retired, this ADS-B thing was just coming online. And so the radar that I had went around once every 4 seconds. So you only knew where the plane was 4 seconds ago. We also had the thing where we could look at the long range radar, and it went around every 10 seconds. And the difference between those two was huge. You had to use 5 miles of separation when you use the long range radar, as opposed to 3 with ours, because it just was, you didn't really know where they were. Now you really know, and it's a big, big change. We had the other crazy thing too, and this is technology from the 1960s. If our radar failed, which occasionally it did, and you're sitting there looking into what's now an empty washing machine, trying to remember where the devil everybody was, we had a way we could do a bunch of patch cables into phone lines and then look at the long range radar. Problem with that was it would only send us 99 targets. If there were 100, one of them's going to go away, and it was purely random which one it would be. And you're trying to do a precision turn onto an instrument landing system, and the plane just goes away. That's fun. Why I no longer have much of fear. And if you saw the guys in the tower with Matt Lauer wearing those earpieces on their right ear with the boom microphones, yeah, I wore mine on the right ear. My hearing is just about gone over there. So that's one of the many reasons they kick us out at 56. It's a really good idea.
Thanks,
Well,
Steve,
anybody
for
else,
sharing what
or-
you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Steve, for sharing what you did today. It was very interesting and uncovered quite a bit of ground actually to what I thought you were going to cover. So that's actually, it was good. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Next month, we've got a guest speaker that